Hello, welcome. I just saw the movie Dune, Part 1. That's the full title. And while I don't usually cover big blockbuster type movies here on the channel, something that I have talked about on a number of different occasions is how I really appreciate when art of whatever kind kind of bridges the gap between more adventurous experimental work and accessibility, inviting new people into the fold to check out work that they might not be familiar with, something that's a little bit different. And I do think that's something that director Denis Villeneuve has been able to do during his Hollywood days here. He was originally a documentary filmmaker, I believe, from Canada, and then, he got pulled into the Hollywood system and has since done some really good work. I mean, Prisoners is very good. Enemy, I think, was more or less independent, but I like that movie quite a bit. What else? Arrival, obviously, it's one of my favorite sci-fi movies in quite a while. Blade Runner 2049 made me care about Blade Runner, and so I was really hoping that a similar thing would happen here with Dune, because Dune is, I mean, my gosh, if you're familiar with sci-fi or even just like literature, you've heard of Dune, you know it's just massive reputation, and its reputation for being incredibly dense while also being very important and prestigious. For a number of reasons, I never wanted to actually read Dune. For one thing, it's not the type of sci-fi that I'm into, the hard sci-fi where it's basically just space opera stuff where you have space politics. I do not care about space politics. I do not care about lore or world building if nothing interesting is happening there, and I didn't think it was worth my time. Long story short, I have not read Dune, but I went into this movie with the hopes that, I'll finally get it. That's what happened with Blade Runner. The Blade Runner sequel helped me understand the appeal of Blade Runner as a whole, and I was really hoping that Dune Part 1, which is the full title, we'll get there in a second, would do the same thing. Right up top, it didn't really. And there are a few different reasons that maybe explain why that happened, or rather why it didn't happen. But one of the very first things I want to talk about is that this is the title is indeed Dune Part 1. I have never seen it called that in any of the marketing. Everywhere I look for the past 2 years, it's always just been Dune. I thought it was going to be a standalone movie. Maybe I missed some interview or something where they explained that this was Part 1 and that's a continuing story. I didn't know that, so I did feel a little bit hoodwinked by the marketing for this film. I think it's kind of sleazy that they haven't been putting Part 1 out there to really let people know that it's not going to have a clean conclusion. By the way, I'm spoiling a few things here. Even now that I've seen the whole movie, that's still my position on the thing. Is just a little bit frustrating. A little bit frustrating to watch, especially given the runtime. I guess I'm happy that they seem to be respecting the source material just in terms of how much screen time they're giving things, and that they want the story to play out at this very considered pace, although I don't think the pacing of Dune Part 1 was quite as slow as Blade Runner 2049 or even of Arrival, come to think of it. It does move quite a bit. But before we really launch into the movie here, by the way, this is going to be very freestyle, just talking about the movie. I don't have like a big thesis I'm trying to ram down your throat, anything like that. But you know what? It was kind of interesting because this is the movie that brought me back to a movie theater. I have not been to a movie in a theater for at least 2 years, around 2 years. This was the one. I knew that I had to watch it in a theater. I have access to HBO Max, so I easily could have watched it there, but I decided not to. I wanted to see it in a theater. I specifically wanted to see it in a nice big IMAX theater, and I ended up going to formerly Grauman's Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, which is now TCL Chinese Theater. TCL's a Chinese company. Make electronics and cheap TVs and stuff. Anyway, and I especially knew that I had to see this movie with really good sound. I don't have a good sound system. That stuff costs a whole lot of money. I wanted the big picture. I wanted all the goods, all the benefits of going to a theater. The movie looks very good. I don't know if I get so much of a voice from the cinematographer as much as get the sense that it's a Villeneuve movie, because it looks quite a bit like Arrival. More so like Enemy and the other really desaturated movies that he's done. Visuals beautiful. Obviously, the special effects are as good as you could hope to get from modern day Hollywood. Like it's just clearly top of the line stuff. Especially the ship designs, they looked great. I thought they were really well animated. The sci-fi junk in the movie looked really cool. There are a lot of cute little devices too that I really liked. There's this little thing that makes vibrations in the ground. That's the thing for the sandworms. There's a little like assassin bug thing that I thought looked kind of neat. Yeah, just cool devices, really good production design. It's definitely the lived-in sci-fi feel that we had in the original Star Wars movies that carried over into the first Blade Runner movie and the sequel. Everything looked appropriate for the setting. Again, I'm not familiar with the source material, so I can't speak to whether it's all super accurate to the books. I don't know if there's really anything else to say about the visuals. It's just, it's almost predictable in how good it looks, and I'm sorry to make that sound negative, because many, probably hundreds of people, maybe thousands with all the VFX artists, who knows, worked really hard to make it look this good, so it's not something we should take for granted, but it doesn't necessarily look mind-blowing in comparison to other massive major studio releases. As I already mentioned, Villeneuve, I think, is incredibly successful at doing adaptations specifically. Enemy was an adaptation. I think Prisoners had some source material too. Certainly Blade Runner. Obviously, Arrival was based on a short story, I believe, and in all of those cases, I think they're incredibly successful adaptations where they make things so visual. You want it to be primarily visual storytelling. On that front, I was very happy with how this movie started out. Like, I don't know, let's say the first 20 to 30 minutes. I think this movie did an excellent job of making it very clear, very quickly, who people are, what their job is, what their role is within the wider power structure, what's happening at the time, and why we should care about it. I think it did an excellent job of explaining stakes, even though there isn't really just one central conflict happening here. I never really felt lost, and I think that's a really, really good sign. And somehow, yeah, this movie manages to convey that sense of complexity and weight to what we're seeing, and gives hints at the lore without drowning you in it and without losing you in just the soup of, well, this actually means this, and this guy, well, you see, he has this whole big backstory. We only get what we need, and I thought that was done very well. I think that leads pretty well into pacing. I do think the movie is well paced, except for that nagging thing at the end where it doesn't have a conclusion really, because it's part one of a two-part thing. You could argue that that's fine because it's respecting the source material and that you're not giving the audience a really standard Hollywood ending. So in that way, it's kind of respectable. It's kind of interesting. But even so, I did feel generally dissatisfied by the end of the movie. I think more than anything, I didn't feel like I cared about what was happening as much as I should have. And I guess that means we're talking about storytelling now. Do I have any notes specific to storytelling? Some of the specific dialogue, especially towards the middle and end of the movie, weirdly cliche, like weird cliche villain stuff, cliche like trailer lines. To be honest, the story as it's been portrayed to me here is cliche, so I don't know whether that's respecting the source material or if it's just a bad screenplay that it feels that way to me, but the essence of the story is that there's kind of a prophecy that there's going to be the one. It's literally called the one, and this person's a savior, messiah type who will somehow make things better for people living in this universe. Not made clear how that happens or why the one is so important, other than they're just the best. They're the best person. They're going to be so helpful. They're going to be a great leader. Anytime you say this one person is the key to everything, or you say, oh, there's the one, or even the Matrix stuff. Oh yeah, there's a trailer for the Matrix 2 that I've seen already, and it kind of sucked. I hate that. For one thing, it's just an incredibly old storytelling device. It's kind of a version of the hero's journey thing, kind of encourages hero worship in my mind. And that's the other side of it, is that it's not just old and stale, it's weak. It's weak, and I don't care. It doesn't help me sympathize with the character, especially, the protagonist, when the protagonist is special because they're special. In fact, we learn here, Timothée Chalamet is our lead actor, of course. That's the whole thing throughout the movie. It's just like he'll just start displaying certain abilities and people will react to him in a certain way, specifically because he's just supposed to be the most special one. I feel like I was enjoying this character so much more in the, 30 minutes before we get to that point, before we get to this weird idea of like almost a spiritual leader who's going gonna come out and save everybody. After that point, it felt like, oh, this is a less interesting character to me now. And it's not to say that Chalamet's performance is bad. I was actually pretty impressed. Probably one of my favorite performances of his I've seen at all. Yeah, just natural, but still has that weight to it. Still feels like, oh yes, this is a very serious story. We're taking this very seriously, which that's fine. That's the tone of the movie. In fact, in general, none of the performances stood out to me as outright bad at all. I mean, no, these are actors of a pretty impressive caliber. They all worked just fine for me. But like really, it really does bother me that apparently this is Dune. Maybe someone will come along and tell me that there's some kind of twist towards the end where like the whole thing about the one coming to save everybody wasn't actually important at all. Maybe that could happen. Even then it would just feel like Harry Potter. Wasn't that the Harry Potter twist? That's another storytelling thing I can mention, is that while overall I do think I understood everything very well, there were some times where I feel like I was getting hit over the head with the movie trying to tell me this image is important, or like this person is important. Too much of that. There was a little bit of that in the Blade Runner sequel too. But here in this case, it's done almost entirely via Chalamet's character's dreams. His name is Paul, by the way. Paul Atreides? See, I know all the lore. So Paul has this ability to essentially, it's kind of foresight or like current sight, where he can see things that he's not physically seeing with his body through his brain or some connection to like a celestial force. They use that so much, and there are times when it's used to like build tension in a ramp up to like a major conflict or a big action sequence, but it happens so many times where he has either visions or actual dreams while he's asleep that just deliver important images and characters just visually, but that's about it. I think that was just fine early on in the movie, but it kept happening so much. I just think it was too much. That's all. Yeah, and some of the stuff just felt really stock Hollywood storytelling stuff. Like the villains especially, there's basically like a villain race. The way they were portrayed, and even like the sets they put those villain characters in, felt really tired to me and kind of obvious. Basically look like orcs, like very pale orcs. There were some strange visual references to Apocalypse Now, two in particular, two really obvious visual references to Apocalypse Now. The first one is in the introduction of this big bad character who's a big fat guy and he's bald. And there's a moment where he's rubbing his bald head while it's wet, it just 100% has to be a reference to the introduction of Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, played by Brando, of course. And then later on, this same character emerges from the water and it looks like, the famous shot in Apocalypse Now where he's coming out of the water and he's all muddy and stuff and he's ready for battle. Those kind of felt out of place. Maybe that first one in particular was supposed to be like shorthand character development for the big bad guy, as in like, Kurtz, what a bad guy he was, but you know what else? Kurtz was a very nuanced character, and we get a lot of information about Kurtz before we even meet the guy. And so it's really built up to, and it's very tense and exciting when you finally get to see him. I don't feel that this villain guy was developed basically at all. I think it's also a big CG face, because I think it's Skarsgård. What's his face? Skarsgård, not the It clown, but the other guy who was in Nymphomaniac and all the other stuff. I think it's him, and then they just did like a CG character. CG did stand out a little bit. I guess that is one of the only effects that kind of pulled me out of the movie a little bit. I'm disappointed by like some of the major conflict stuff. It is ultimately space politics, power struggles, backdoor deals, sneaky manipulation to make things happen. I was not impressed by any of those elements. It did feel very standard, and I don't know why I'm supposed to care. The little button I can put on the discussion about storytelling in the script is that I don't know what the message is. I have no idea what the message is supposed to be here. I don't know. Leadership? Is leadership the theme here? Is that what's happening? We do see a lot of different types of leadership. We see different types of like father-son bonding, even just parental bonds in general. There's a lot of that over the movie. Whether it says anything useful about leadership thus far, I would argue no, especially because at the center of it all we have. Or you could just be the one who's supposed to do all this stuff, and you'll be fine because that's your destiny or something. That's just what you do. That's almost everything. And again, I don't have a big thesis here, and I'm not telling people to watch or not watch it. I do certainly feel like I went to see a movie. I had my big movie theater going experience. And now I just want to complain for a while about the Hans Zimmer score. So I think people should stop hiring Hans Zimmer to write scores for their movies, because I think he does really bland work, and I think he's been doing that bland work and repeating himself for at least the last 20 to 25 years. He's been working longer than that, of course. I'm really getting tired of it. I'm really getting tired of the cliches, man. And you can retire. I know you've got more money than God. Like, you can hire other people. We can maybe get some new talent in the mix who are going to bring some new, fresh ideas, who aren't just going to pop into Cubase and plop down like 15 horn blasts in a row, because that's what you do when you need something action-y going on, or when there's something big on the screen. Just horns, 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 horns. How about that? Did you like Inception? Here's that shit again. And it's so incredibly boring. And in particular, okay, so there's one race of people. They're pretty important to the story, and they're essentially the desert people, and they're like, it's clearly at least like a sideways reference to the cultures and peoples of the Middle East, but they live on a desert planet, and it's very hot, and they know how to live in the desert, and they're very good at it. You just know, like, as soon as someone tells you, I'll tell you that right now, these are the characters. We need music, right? We need some score music for the desert people. Think of a big Hollywood movie. What kind of sound do you think they'll come up with? You're probably right. It's the most cliche and I know that it has like a tiny little bit of basis in ethnomusicology, musical modes that are not typically used in Western music, and microtonal stuff. Oh my gosh, I was laughing so hard whenever this happened. Anytime something kind of dramatic happened in like the second half of the movie, or anytime we saw the sand or the sand people, there were microtonal female vocalizations, either solo or in a chorus. And every single time I thought it was hilarious, because that's the most basic thing you could do. Like, that's what you would do if you were making a commercial that was set in the Saharan desert. Like, just have some lady doing microtonal runs in any key. Just pick a key, copy, paste, done. Like, you're good to go. I thought it was so funny, and he uses it so much here. Bless his heart. I don't know if he didn't care, or if he just doesn't have any ideas or like skill when it comes to trying to integrate music and sounds from other cultures, but he's not the guy. I'm sorry. He was not the guy to hire for this movie, other than like, you want his name attached to the project. I think it's embarrassing. I think some of the music in this movie is downright embarrassing. And yeah, it made me feel embarrassed on the behalf of the movie, as well as making me feel embarrassed to be watching it. Please stop hiring Hans Zimmer, or get him some help. Get him like a ghostwriter who won't get any credit whatsoever, but he'll get a little bit of cash to like actually do Hans Zimmer's job for him, because he just does not seem up to the task anymore. And honestly, I think that's about it. Like, so overall, there are quite a few elements that make it feel like a standard Hollywood blockbuster, and there are probably more of those than I would prefer, because I do think Villeneuve and a lot of the team that he tends to work with is more than capable of doing something different and doing something very interesting that feels bold. And this really does feel like something that was hemmed in some ways by either studio notes or just like some weird abstract draw to make things more standard, more mainstream. I mean, I know they wanted to make all the money in the world, so I guess maybe that was the sole motivation. And in certain ways, that's good. Certain results from that, like the just plain accessibility and being able to follow the stakes and the characters and everything that's happening, all of that's done really well. But yeah, on the other hand, in terms of specific dialogue, in terms of story premise, lack of character development in any compelling way, those things just got in the way for me. That's all. It is a movie. It's a big, expensive movie, and you will see big, expensive things on the screen. You will see some very good acting. You will see some really neat production design, and you will see some kind of adaptation of a sci-fi property that many, many people really love and hold close to their hearts. That's about it. Yeah. I hope you're doing well. I feel like it's a weird time of year. I enjoy the shift in the weather and everything, but I don't know. It does feel like a transitional period, doesn't it? I think you're moving on to the next thing, even if you don't know what the next thing is. Thank you so much for watching a video from a small channel like mine, and goodbye.